It's lager time! Yay! Lager time. Poems, stories and thoughts. By me, Paul Cree. Who else? Greetings, bonjour, what's happening? Welcome to Lager Time. Legions of lager lights, grab your tins, your bottles and your pints. My name is Paul Cree and this is my little podcast and blog where I share bits of my writing, stories, poems, thoughts, sometimes music, etc. So I'm changing things up a little bit this week, largely related to the bit I just said before where I say podcast and blog, because it's a minor thing, but I'm just slightly streamlining what I'm doing, for want of a better word. I used to, or up until now, I would script out these introductions because I wanted to be quite precise about what I was saying, but I don't really know why I was doing it. I think I just got into the habit of doing it. So if you subscribe on the Substack where you get the actual written text of all of this, I would put these introductions in too. So when it lands in your inbox, you just get a load of hey, hi sort of chat, which I'm guessing most people don't probably want to read. So I'm cutting all that out and leaving it on here, just the podcast where I can speak freely a little bit, introduce what I'm doing and maybe shout a few things out that I'm working on or whatever. That's it really. Nothing major. I'm sure it's not going to cause protests and disruption on the motorways and the railway system. But here we are. I just want to speed things up a little bit because it does take quite a long time doing this, and the more I do it, the longer it tends to take in terms of the writing and stuff. So, what's been happening? Not quite a lot, to be honest. Mostly not a lot different from what it was before. This is why you should script things, Paul, because you don't know what you're talking about. I've been doing lots of workshops. One thing I neglected to mention on the last episode 2 weeks ago, well, it will be 2 weeks when this goes out, is that I had quite a nice evening at this year's Offie Awards. The Offie Awards is shorthand for Off West End Awards. So it's a theatre awards ceremony, I suppose, for all the smaller non-West End, mainly non-commercial theatres. So the Pied Piper show, which I'd worked on, which was Beatbox Academy, who I've worked with on and off for about 15, actually not 15 years, since 2011. The Academy's been running for 15 years. Anyway, they had a show which is currently on tour. It's getting ready to go to Coventry, I think, and then it goes to South Bank. But it was nominated for Best Sound or something like that. So the Academy, of course, were invited along and it won the award. It was a great moment. Conrad, the director, and my good pal, it's kind of his show really. He took everyone, all the young people on stage with him. So there was about 15 of them all on stage going nuts. It was wicked. Yeah, it was a really, really nice moment. And it was quite a pleasant evening all in all, though somewhat long. There was a lot of awards. A lot. However, that one moment was really, really worth it. It's a large up Beatbox Academy, large up Conrad Murray and Lara, who I think produced that show initially or was involved in it. And yeah, if you want to catch it, it's going to be in Coventry. Then it's coming back to London, South Bank Centre in late May. So it's a retelling of the classic story, Pied Piper, but it's all done through beatbox and rap, of course, which leads me to something else that I've mentioned that I'm currently working on, Romeo and Julliet, which is now running at the Polka Theatre in Wimbledon. So it's a show for young people, I'd say teenagers really and above. So it's aimed at 8 years old. But yeah, no, they are something that little ones can get enjoyment out of as well. But it's now up and running. Had his press night on the weekend, so I'm in the second cast. So I'm getting ready to go into the run later on in April. So in just under a month, I'm going to be taking on the roles of Mercutio, Benvolio, and the stories version of Friar Tuck, which is a guy that runs a community centre called Freddie. But it's very fun. It's loads of music, bit of movement, a lot of singing, a lot of rapping, a lot of beatboxing, all the things that I like doing. Well, less so singing and dancing, but I'm going to be doing that stuff anyway a little bit. But yeah, go catch it. It's running all the way to about halfway through April, I think. I've got to do 6 or 8 shows. Yeah, should be a laugh. So that's... And yeah, it's mainly what I've been doing, plus all the regular workshops with Dream Arts and the 4th Monkey Drama School. You know, big changes at Millwall as well. Neil Harris, club legend, coming in. You know, it's a little bit of a backward step. I'm not entirely sure about it, but that's kind of about it, really. So let's get on to this week's piece, which is the 6th one. So we're halfway through this series. I mean, I say we, it's me, unless you really are listening to every episode, and if you are, I'm very grateful. But I'm really enjoying doing it. I hope you're getting something out of it, if you have been listening or reading, as the case may be so far. But yeah, it's the 6th one, and this is actually the one I wrote first back in November or December, when I had, I decided I was going to do this. I don't know why I wrote this one first. Maybe because I had that quote up on a screen or something. But yeah, this one, I talk a lot about growing up Catholic. Something I've wanted to talk about for a long time, and I have touched on it in a number of poems and stories or whatever, but not quite like to this extent. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. It's called On the Good Catholics, and there are some. Yeah, and as usual, if you like this, please recommend it to a friend, or as mentioned, if you subscribe on Substack, you get the written version of it, and from now on it will only be the actual piece itself, not me all the waffling like I'm doing now. There'll be a few links and stuff, but that's about it. But yeah, you get the written version, but if you're listening on Spotify or wherever else, large up, strictly audio, you get this little bit on the intro now. But yeah, there's a Ko-Fi, which is the leave, like a cash donation site. If you want to make me a donation to what I'm doing, it's Buy Me a Lager. There'll be a link in the description. I've also pressed a button last week on the Substack, which means you can become a paid subscriber, but I'm not entirely sure how that works. I'm not charging anyone. So, if you want to, I think it's like a $5 a month, but I'm not really pushing that at the moment. I just pressed the button to see what would happen. But yeah, that's on you. But yeah, but I mainly, if you want to help, just please tell some people about it. There's a few subscribers now, but it'd be nice to build it up, and if you feel like dropping me a line or on the Substack, you can leave comments or whatever, please do, because I understand that a lot of these pieces are quite opinionated. Not everyone's going to agree with everything I'm saying, which is okay. That's absolutely fine. Also, like, the way I'm writing them is probably, could do with a little bit of criticism or whatever. Whatever. But yeah, get involved. That's all I'm saying. I said quite a lot there, didn't I? So here you go. This is what happens when I'm unscripted. I just go a bit off the rails. Maybe I'm better when I'm scripted, but I was going to write down some brief points that I wanted to talk about, like bullet points, which is how I write the stories sometimes, that when I do oral, whatever. Anyway, enjoy. That's it for now. Keep it larger than life. Peas and taters. Paul. Yeah. On the good Catholics. Whenever you want to cheer yourself, think of the qualities of your fellows, the energy of one, for example, the decency of another, the generosity of a third, some other merit in a fourth. There is nothing so cheering as the stamp of virtues manifest in the character of colleagues, and the greater the collective incidence, the better. So keep them ready at hand. Book 6, Passage 48. I was raised a Catholic in a church-going Catholic family, went to Catholic schools, so therefore by default grew up in a Catholic community. The majority of people I knew for probably the first 10 to 15 years of my life would have been Catholic. My upbringing was never that strict, not in the stereotypical way, and my school was probably quite progressive for a Catholic school. If anything, both the schools and the church I went to were a bit half-assed, like the current Man United team, not the force they once were, perhaps resting on mighty laurels. But nevertheless, it was a Catholic upbringing. I read somewhere once there's over 7 million Catholics in the UK, the majority of which, at some point or other, are children of immigrants. The Catholicism in my family comes from my granny, who was Irish by way of her mother. Her dad was English, but she lived in the south of Ireland as a young girl with my auntie before coming to England where she grew up. Though predominantly white, most of the kids at my school had parents or grandparents from somewhere outside of England. Despite mainly being around other Catholics, there are a couple of times as a kid where I can remember a few sly comments made about us being Catholic. Growing up in the southeast of England, this of course was nothing compared to what my parents would have gone through in a different era, both having family from Glasgow and Belfast, both Protestant and Catholic. One of these little moments was in the Cub Scouts, when some twat who was one of the helpers must have been talking about church to me and my brother. He was laughing at us being Catholic and was going on about all that ritualistic nonsense, which I didn't understand the meaning of at the time. I just remember feeling a bit hurt, confused and embarrassed, but not sure why. A minor thing, of course, but perhaps the first time I became aware of some kind of anti-Catholic sentiment. The other times was when I was in Marine Cadets on those big parade days when it became painfully obvious who the Catholic kids were. At some point, everyone had to say the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer, and being Royal Navy, British Armed Forces and all that, they were Church of England services. So they always said that extra line at the end of the prayer which Catholics didn't say. I didn't know about this line, or I'd be on autopilot and forget it. And thinking we got to the end of the Lord's Prayer, I'd give it a big old Amen. But these pricks were still going, with some Thy is the kingdom bollocks. I'd be thinking, where did this extra line come from? What happened to brevity? Jesus wept. See what I done there? And of course, I have lots of siblings. I'm one of 7 kids. Probably by the age of 12, I would have lost count of the amount of people, when hearing of my big family, would make some wisecrack about Johnny's or was there nothing on the telly? My parents like to make love. I fully respect that. Also, on that note, but a side note in all of this, I remember being confused as a child, as a big message being pumped out by society at the time, it seemed, by way of Grange Hill and posters at the doctor's surgery, but obviously not my school, though half-assed it was still Catholic, was promoting the use of contraceptives and the idea of family planning. So when I once asked my mum if I was planned, and she said, "No, you just came along," I was thinking, do I need to get on the blower to Esther Ranson? By the time I'd grown up and left home, and already gone through a few rebellious years where I refused to go to church and told everyone I'd turned my back on it all, the circle of people I knew would have changed quite a lot. I lived in Brighton for a couple of years in my early 20s where I was trying to do the music thing, then moved up to London and eventually found myself, by happy accident, working in the arts. The amount of Catholic people I knew and other practicing religious people in general became less and less. Moving about in these circles with a lot of very liberal agnostic people, it wasn't that rare to encounter avowed atheists and occasionally confrontational pricks who would start slagging the church off as soon as they became aware I was Catholic, as if by magic, right there and then I was the living embodiment of the Vatican and the clergy and the default defender of all the many misdemeanours, whilst casually holding my Lourdes holy water bottle in the shape of Our Lady, flinging it about, blessing everyone, when all I probably wanted was a cup of tea and a Twix from the venue cafe wherever it was I was working. To be fair to them, a lot of these people would have grown up in the church themselves, gone to Catholic schools, etc., and of course there was no shortage of scandals and possibly bad personal experiences, so some would have had genuine reasons for their resentment. I can sympathise why a person would turn their back on it. I did for a good few years. Didn't work out for me though. The ones who really wound me up were the types who'd make these sweeping generalisations, not just about the church, the religion, but more importantly its devotees, while seemingly knowing very little about it, other than a few well-worn clichés about pedo priests and the no rubber embargo. In the funded, arty, hyper-liberal circles I was rolling in, slagging off the Catholic Church was a free hit. It seemed as if it could give a person the facade of being edgy or intelligent or rebellious even. You weren't likely to find many people who would want to defend it, not in those places anyway. Sometimes I'd get a bit knocked off and at least try and provide a bit of context, nuance and actual lived experience, a phrase that by now, of course, is probably used by those very same people to justify their annoyance at some big injustice they want to shout to the world about. Some of these people were committed atheists, some of them were lapsed Catholics, some of them agnostic, and some of them were just bellends with big mouths and not a lot of depth underneath the megatropes. Seemingly they enjoyed referencing the nonce scandals and going on to make scathing remarks about the rest of the faith with very little regard for anyone present who may still be into it. I never heard them talk about any other Christian denominations or other religions for that matter, all of which probably have their scandals. Apart from the odd generalisation about organised religion being the cause of all wars or whatever, though they all seem to like Buddhism. As I said, free hit. I was no defender of the church, especially the scandals, and there are enough of those. In fact, some years before my time, there was a local priest who was embroiled in some abuse case. I read somewhere the church hid him away for years before the story came out. Why would I want to defend that? However, when someone would start going off on one, whilst not really knowing what they were talking about, just armed with stereotypes and not a lot else, having grown up in it, aside from pissing me off, it would have this side effect of making me reflect on my own experiences of it. Sometimes I'd retort, most of the times I'd just move on, get my tea, Twix, dip, then scarper, as I doubt they were ever interested in having their minds changed, or at least hearing an alternative view. For the record, I've met plenty of Catholic people and those of other faiths who are equally narrow-minded and stubborn, but we're not talking about them today. When I'd calm down and actually think about growing up in this religion, there was always one thing that came to mind when thinking about it all. Not the Pope, the Vatican, the bishops, the rituals, the Bible, the guilt stories, the nonce stories, confessions, communion, transubstantiation, the standard issue holy water from Lourdes. No. It's always the people who made up the parish of English Martyrs Hawley and the other neighbouring churches and associated schools in Crawley. In other words, the local church community I grew up in. That's what always comes to mind. In that community were some of the most selfless, giving, kindest and caring people I have ever come across in my 40 years on this planet. And that includes a few priests too. People that looked out for each other, and others too, inside and outside of the church community. There were people who probably didn't have much themselves, but would drop bags of clothes and food off to other families they knew who were struggling. My family benefited from this many times. I never shake off those memories of sheer joy and excitement when a bag of clothes would get dropped off on the doorstep from a family with older kids, and then began the squabbles with my siblings about who got what. When we didn't have a car, there was often someone from the church pulling over in the street and giving us a lift home when Mum had a week's worth of shopping to carry, even if it was going out of their way. I remember my late godmother's husband driving all us kids the 100-odd miles down to Dover a few times when my nan died. Sat through the whole funeral and wake. That was also the first time I ever tasted beer. He didn't bat an eyelid. Or one of the Eucharistic ministers putting money in Mum's hand to help with the train fares back and forth to Kent when Nan was sick. Father Spellman taking the whole parish down to Littlehampton for the day every year out of his own pocket. Those were great times. And these are just a few examples. There are tons more. I could probably write a book on the amount of good people I knew growing up in the church who were great people. Were there a few wrong uns? There probably was. Were there a few bell ends? There probably was. Were some of them a bit nosy and annoying? Definitely. But they paled in significance to the good ones. I've met plenty of good people outside of the church. Of course they exist. It's just whenever I actually think about it, all those old faces all pop into my mind. It's important to me that I do remember them and try and emulate their great examples of humility and charity, just without the annoying bits. When people so casually quote the church off, it doesn't bother me nearly as much as it used to, though clearly it still has some effect, as I wouldn't be writing this. If anything, I feel sorry for them for being so willfully ignorant about things which are far more complex than just muggy aspersion cast-outs, even if they think it makes them look good. The irony often being that they have a religious-like zeal in their condemnations. Let him without sin cast the first stone and all that. I feel blessed, no pun intended, that I had these kind-hearted people in my life outside of my own family, who often gave so much and expected nothing in return. I feel like I want to at least try and do all those good people a bit of justice in my own little way. So I'll keep fighting the good fight and large them up where I can and try and emulate them, or at the very least, do like Marcus says and think of them when I'm castigating the world around me. Now, where's that Twix? I fancy a cup of tea.
It's longer time. Yay!
Lager Time. Poems, stories and thoughts. By me, Paul Cree. Who else?